Welcome to No Sleep, where the night never ends, and every whisper in the dark could be something real. Tonight's story isn't just horror. It's a memory, a warning, a door that should have stayed closed. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep. When the flood came, no one saw it coming. It had rained for days, the kind of endless southern downpour that turns dirt into sludge and creeks into rivers. Our backyard had always sloped into a dense gully of limestone and tree roots, and my mom used to warn us not to play near it when it rained. But warnings are like whispers to kids like Kieran, my 5-year-old brother, the storm chaser of our family. He was always running, climbing, leaping from the high places, chasing frogs and building forts. He had the kind of laughter that cut through even the worst days, but he never feared anything. That's what scared me most about him. The last time I saw him, he was wearing a red raincoat with cartoon frogs on it, splashing in the muddy creek behind the house. It was swollen, louder than usual, and snaking toward the limestone mouth of the cave just beyond the trees. I shouted at him to come back, but he didn't hear me, or didn't want to. That moment replayed in my head like a cursed loop, my boots slipping in the mud, my voice cracking as I yelled again, and Kieran turning his head just long enough to smile before his foot vanished into the rushing water. And then he was gone. We searched for hours before calling the police. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face when she dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor, soaked and trembling. They found one of his shoes wedged between 2 rocks near the cave entrance, half buried in dead leaves. That was all. A rescue team came. Divers, dogs, helicopters. For 2 weeks, our house became a makeshift headquarters. I saw men with maps and lights and gear I didn't understand. The cave network was extensive, deep, winding, with water-filled passages that hadn't been mapped since the 80s. But after 14 days, they stopped. "We've done everything we can," they said. He was likely swept into a submerged passage. No one could have survived. I hated that word. Likely. There was no body, no closure, just a lingering question that metastasized in my chest. What if they were wrong? At night, I couldn't sleep. I would dream of him, alone in the dark, calling my name with that same helpless tone from the creek. I'd jolt awake with his voice still echoing in my skull. People offered condolences, teachers, classmates, neighbors. They said things like, "God has a plan, and he's in a better place." But those words were like plastic flowers, fake and lifeless. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted proof. I wanted my little brother. I was 16 at the time. The guilt was unbearable. I was supposed to be watching him. I was supposed to protect him. Instead, I stayed inside doing math homework while he was pulled into the underworld. At the funeral, there was no casket, just a framed photo of Kieran with a stuffed rabbit next to it and 100 people pretending that they could understand our grief. I sat in the front row in a black suit I had outgrown, wishing I could go back, scream louder, run faster, grab his arm before the water did. My parents coped differently. My mom shut down. She stopped smiling, stopped singing, stopped living. My dad grew angry at the weather, at the cave, at the universe. We never visited the backyard again. But the cave stayed, silent, watching, waiting. I would find myself walking to the edge of the gully sometimes, standing there under the trees, listening to the faint trickle of water echoing from the mouth. It was like the earth had swallowed my brother, and the cave was the gaping throat that refused to spit him out. Even years later, it haunted me. Sometimes I would hear tapping in the walls of my room at night. I'd tell myself it was the house settling or a tree branch, but deep down, I felt something else. Something clawing beneath the surface, desperate to be remembered. Kieran's room was kept untouched, toys still in place, his favorite pajamas folded neatly on the bed. The smell of bubblegum shampoo lingered faintly in the air. My mom dusted it every Sunday, but never stepped inside. One night, 2 years after the disappearance, I had a dream I can't forget. I was standing at the mouth of the cave. Everything was silent. Too silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of dripping water echoing from deep within. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Small, bare, wet. They echoed toward me, and a child's silhouette emerged from the shadows. He was thin, skeletal, eyes wide and vacant. His voice cracked when he spoke, a hoarse whisper. "Chris, why didn't you come sooner?" I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I didn't care what people said. I didn't care about acceptance or moving on. I needed answers. I needed closure. And if no one else would give it to me, I would find it myself. Even if it meant going into the cave alone. Even if it meant crawling into the dark place that stole my brother and never coming back. Grief can age a person in ways no clock or calendar ever could. By the time I started college, I didn't feel 17. I felt hollow, like I'd left a piece of myself behind in the dark, somewhere under 30 feet of earth and regret. But I didn't bury the pain. I trained it, sharpened it, turned it into something useful, while other freshmen joined fraternities and played beer pong on the lawn. I joined the university's outdoor exploration club, the ones who were into spelunking, caving, the very thing I had once feared like death itself. I never told them why. They assumed I was just another thrill seeker. I let them think that. It was easier than explaining the dreams, or why I sometimes stared too long at tight crawl spaces with a mix of panic and longing. By winter break, I knew how to rig a harness, anchor ropes, and navigate blind. I practiced rappelling into dark pits, crawling through holes barely wider than my shoulders. I studied rock formations, cave ecosystems, breathing techniques. Not because I loved it, but because I was preparing for something no one else could understand. Every skill I learned, every scar I earned, brought me closer to that cave. Back home, I never mentioned spelunking to my parents. I didn't dare. My mother couldn't even say Kieran's name without her eyes glazing over like a haunted doll. My father refused to drive down the forest road. We never sold the house, though we should have. It became a tomb. But I visited, quietly. I'd walk down the familiar path behind our yard, past the brittle trees and stone-lined creek bed. The mouth of the cave was still there, low, jagged, overgrown with moss, a black slit in the limestone, like a wound that never healed. I'd stand at its edge and listen. Just listen. Sometimes the wind whistled like a child crying from far away. Then one summer, everything changed. The drought came, longer and harsher than anything we'd had in years. The creek dried to a trickle, revealing stretches of exposed rock I had never seen before. The locals complained about their gardens dying. Farmers cursed the skies. But I saw opportunity. Water had once kept the deeper passage sealed, too dangerous for even expert divers. But now the tunnel might be clear, exposed, vulnerable, like a secret begging to be found. I returned to the cave at night. I didn't tell my spelunking friends, didn't text anyone. I didn't want rescue. I wanted discovery. I wanted truth, whatever form it came in. I packed my gear in silence: harness, anchors, rope, carabiners, headlamps, a cheap camcorder, first aid supplies. I held a small, laminated map of the cave system, the one the rescue team had made years ago. I'd memorized it down to the cracks. But beyond a certain point, it just ended. A blank space. A mystery. And somewhere in that mystery was my brother. The drive back to the old neighborhood was surreal. Houses I'd trick-or-treated at now sat quietly under the moonlight, their windows staring back at me like glass eyes. The road to the gully was still just gravel and weeds. No signs, no warnings, no closure. I parked beneath the same trees where I'd once played hide-and-seek with Kieran. I sat in the car for a long time, just staring into the woods. Then I got out, locked the doors, and walked into the dark. The forest had changed. More brittle, more silent. Even the crickets seemed to avoid this place. My boots crunched dead leaves as I followed the old trail, my flashlight casting twisted shadows across bark and bone-dry roots. There it was, the cave mouth. Smaller than I remembered, like it was shrinking, like the earth was trying to seal away what it had swallowed. I crouched beside it and whispered, "Kieran." Nothing. Just wind brushing the dead grass. I crawled in, slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. The cool air kissed my cheeks, and the scent of earth, mildew, and ancient rot filled my nose. The light from the outside world narrowed behind me until it vanished completely. Now it was just me and the dark. I crawled deeper, dragging my bag. The tunnel dipped and widened just enough to crouch. My headlamp cut through the black like a blade, revealing smooth rock, trickling water, and old graffiti from search parties past, faded names, dates, crosses. I passed the place where the search teams had turned back, the submerged tunnel. But it wasn't submerged anymore. The drought had changed everything. The narrow passage that once roared with water was now a damp tunnel of glistening stone. Just 1 to 2 inches of water trickled along the bottom. The floor sloped downward, and I could hear something faint in the distance. Dripping. Echoes. I hesitated, my heart pounding. This was it. The path no one else had taken. The place no light had touched in years. I sat down on the slick rock, strapped into my harness, and began drilling anchors into the limestone wall. The bolts sank in with effort, but they held. When the rope was secured, I tested it with my weight. I took a deep breath. My hand trembled as I clicked the carabiner into place. Somewhere far below, water fell into darkness. And maybe, just maybe, something else waited with it. The black opening yawned before me, tight, wet, and unwelcoming. It looked less like a passage and more like a throat, waiting to swallow me whole. I clicked my helmet back on, tightened my harness one last time, and checked the rope. The knots held, the bolts were secure, but no amount of preparation could quiet the instinct screaming in the back of my mind. Don't go in. I went in anyway. There was no turning back. The tunnel was narrow, too narrow. The kind of space where your body has to shift, twist, surrender. My chest scraped rock, my arms cramped, and my breath came in those short, foggy gasps. To To move forward, I had to go face down, head tilted sideways to keep breathing. Every inch felt like an argument with gravity and stone. Water trickled beneath me, cold and constant, soaking through my clothes. My flashlight beam jittered against the walls, highlighting the unnatural curves carved by centuries of rushing water. Soft, smooth, and treacherous. I tried to ignore the claustrophobia clawing up my throat. The further I went, the more I understood the horror stories. Nutty Putty, Floyd Collins, people who died not from falling, but from getting stuck, alone, crushed. And yet, something pulled me forward. My mind flashed with images of Kieran, his red raincoat, his missing shoe, his smile just before the creek took him. And then, the dreams. His voice echoing from the dark, calling my name, screaming, begging. The tunnel grew tighter still. My helmet scraped against the stone, so I removed it and clipped it to my harness, leaving only my headlamp strapped to my forehead. Bad idea. The rock pressed against my back and ribs, suffocating, alive. My rope dragged behind me, occasionally catching on knobs or ridges. I was descending now, gradually, then sharply. The water changed pitch. I heard it, falling ahead of me. A drip became a stream. A stream became a cascade. I was entering a vertical shaft. My breath quickened. I shifted to my side, twisting until my left shoulder could drop, and let my hips follow. My ATC scraped rock as I fed rope through it, inching downward. I could feel the tunnel squeezing tighter, before widening again like a funnel. I didn't know how deep it went. I only knew that if I slipped, I wouldn't stop falling until I hit water, or something worse. The shaft opened suddenly into a vast, echoing chamber. The sound hit me first, falling water crashing into a pool far below, amplified by the domed ceiling. Then came the chill, thick and unnatural, like the air hadn't moved in years. My headlamp barely pierced the gloom. I dangled for a second, suspended in an abyss. Then I descended, slowly, cautiously, until my boots touched something that wasn't rock. It was water, cold, and deep. The shock of it stole my breath. I stopped feeding rope, realizing that I was waist deep in a pool with no bottom in sight. I couldn't see the floor. I couldn't see the edges. Just shadows and water stretching beyond the reach of my light. I was in the cave's stomach now. I unclipped the rope and began to sidestroke toward what looked like a rocky ledge. Every movement dragged at me. Wet clothes, gear, the rope coiled around my waist. The water was heavy and silent and too still. Something brushed my leg beneath the surface. I froze. Fish, I told myself. Just a fish. But my pulse didn't calm. Eventually, I reached the edge and hauled myself up onto a flat rock. My hands trembled. My teeth chattered. I sat there, drenched and gasping, trying not to vomit from the exhaustion. That's when I saw it. Not a person, not a body, a granola wrapper, old, torn, flattened, impossible. I picked it up slowly, my fingers shaking. I hadn't brought that brand. It wasn't mine. It wasn't from the rescue teams either. They never made it this far. I looked around the chamber. My headlamp flicked across jagged boulders and glistening stalactites. There were other tunnels, multiple offshoots leading into deeper darkness. Cracks in the stone. Slits just big enough for something small to crawl through. Something small and hungry. I spotted more signs. A muddy handprint smeared on a flat stone. The remnants of a fish skeleton. Tiny bones. Crushed shells. My throat tightened. Kieran. He was down here. Or had been. Alive. Suddenly, the chamber felt too large. too open, the walls too quiet. I felt exposed, watched. Something about the water, the way it barely rippled despite the waterfall, unnatural. As if the chamber itself was holding its breath. I stood and turned slowly, sweeping my light across every crevice. That's when I heard the sound. Plop. A small splash. Behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Then, a whisper. Not a voice. Not quite. But the idea of one. Wet and broken and animal. A sound like a rasping breath through cracked lips. I stepped back. Another splash. Closer this time. I turned and saw the pale shape. Half submerged. Motionless. Eyes open. Reflecting light. A child. Too thin. Too still. Skin like wax. Bones pressing through skin like wire under flesh. He was just watching me. Then he moved. He rose from the water with a stillness that was far more unsettling than violence. No gasps, no coughing, no struggle to breathe. He emerged slowly, silently, until the water peeled away from his bare ribs and sunken chest, like a second skin. His limbs looked boneless, impossibly thin, hanging limp at his sides. His skin was the color of marble, pale, waterlogged, almost translucent in the beam of my headlamp. But it was his face that rooted me to the spot. That was Kieran's face, or what was left of it. Sunken cheeks, dark, hollow eye sockets that somehow reflected light without blinking. His lips were cracked and bleeding, stretched unnaturally wide around teeth that seemed too sharp, too yellow. Blood, my blood, was still smeared across his chin from the attack. Because yes, he had bitten me. He had eaten me. And yet, he was still my brother. Kieran? I choked the name out like a prayer, half hope, half despair. He didn't speak. He tilted his head slightly, the way he used to when he was curious. I remembered that exact gesture from when he was 5. Watching ants crawl across the sidewalk. But there was no wonder in his eyes now. Only instinct, the way predators study something before deciding whether it's food or threat. I took a slow step back. Kieran blinked. Once. A spasm shot through his jaw, like a tick or a tremor. Then, with sudden, inhuman speed, he scuttled backward on all fours into the shadows. I flinched. Gone. No splash. No sound. Just retreat. Like some deep-sea creature sliding back into its burrow. I stood frozen. Blood thudding in my ears. I wasn't alone down here. And what I had found wasn't just a missing boy. It was something changed. Something molded by years in the dark. Fed by instinct and starvation. Shaped by silence and desperation. Something not quite human anymore. But he had recognized me. I was sure of it. And that was the worst part. I moved toward the ledge where he had disappeared. Slowly. Every step echoed too loud in the chamber. My leg throbbed from the bite. A sharp pulsing heat that warned me it was worse than I thought. I limped, my balance off. But curiosity was stronger than caution. At the base of the rock wall, I found it. A crack. Maybe a foot wide. Jagged. Shaped like a lightning bolt carved into the stone. I got on my knees and shined my light inside. The tunnel curved sharply, narrowing as it bent left into total blackness. And there, just barely within reach, was something impossible. A sock. Child-sized. Faded blue, tattered. I recognized it instantly. I'd helped my mom buy that pair. Had even joked about the tiny dinosaurs printed on the heel. It had been missing when they found his shoe at the cave's entrance. Everyone assumed the sock had been lost in the creek, but here it was. Still here. Still his. I picked it up with trembling fingers, and a scent wafted up. Rank, earthy, old. But beneath that, faintly, bubblegum shampoo. A sound escaped me, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He had survived, and he had stayed alive. Down here, alone. The chamber echoed with dripping water and the distant roar of the waterfall, but the silence between drips felt charged, like something was listening, watching. I reached into my bag and pulled out a granola bar. Slowly, I unwrapped it and placed it near the crack. Then I took my spare headlamp, turned it to its dimmest setting, and laid it next to the food, the beam facing into the narrow gap. I sat back, breathing hard, waiting. Minutes passed. Then, movement, a whisper of sound, a hand, small, white, emerged from the dark. It paused just short of the light. I dared not speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The hand snatched the granola bar. In one clean, practiced motion, it vanished back into the tunnel. A rustle of plastic, a chewing noise. Sharp, animalistic. I fought the tears rising in my throat. He was still in there, still eating, still alive. But how long had it been since he'd spoken? Since he'd seen the sun? Since he'd heard someone say his name? Chris, I whispered to myself. Say it. Say your name. But I couldn't. I was afraid of what would happen if he said mine back. Instead, I whispered, I'll come back, I promise. I'll bring help. I'll get you out. There was no answer, only the chewing. And then, retreating footsteps. Bare, wet, scraping stone. I leaned against the wall and pressed my palms to my face. I couldn't stop shaking. What had we done? We left a 5-year-old boy in a cave to starve and crawl in the dark for years. He should have died. He should have disappeared. But he didn't. He survived. He adapted. And now, something else lived where Kieran used to be. Something with teeth. I looked at my leg, still bleeding, the bite deep and raw. The skin around it had turned a dark purplish red. I needed to get out. I needed medical attention. But more than that, I needed to tell someone. Not just that Kieran was alive, but that the cave had changed him. And that maybe it had kept him. I had to get out. My leg burned like it was on fire. The flesh around the bite swelling with an ugly heat that throbbed through every nerve. I wrapped it as best I could with gauze from my pack, tying it so tightly I saw stars. It didn't matter. I needed to climb out before the bleeding made it impossible. But just before I turned away, I paused. Something deep inside me, it wasn't logic or even grief, kept me staring at that crack in the wall. The light I'd left was dimming. The empty granola wrapper lay crumpled beside it. I leaned in, placing my hand on the stone. Cold, unyielding. Then I whispered again, Kieran, it's me. It's Chris. Silence. Then movement. Not the scamper of a retreating child. Something closer. Scrape. A soft drag of nails or fingertips against stone. Kieran? No answer. But then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not panicked or fast. This was slow, wet, wheezing. I shined my headlamp directly into the tunnel and leaned closer. And then, a face, pressed to the crack, watching me, not more than 6 inches from my own. I screamed and stumbled backward, slamming my injured leg on the rock behind me. The pain exploded, but the adrenaline overwhelmed it. My light wavered and then focused again on the crack. But he was still there, pressed to the opening, unmoving, just watching. His face was closer now, and I could see it in awful detail. His skin was stretched thin over bone. The corners of his mouth cracked open as if he'd forgotten how to close it. His eyes, once hazel, were now a milky white, ringed with raw pink flesh, unblinking, blind. But somehow they stared through me. "Kieran," I whispered again, even as tears rolled down my cheeks. He moved then, his jaw twitching, like he was trying to form words. Something shook in his throat. Not a growl, not a moan, a syllable. Chirr. My blood ran cold. He knew me. "Chris! Yes, I'm here," I said, crouching low, the flashlight trembling in my grip. "I'm here. I've been looking for you. God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner." But then, his face contorted, the lips curled, and he bared his teeth. Not in recognition, in hunger. He lunged at the crack, slamming his face against the stone hard enough to smear blood on it. I screamed and scrambled backward, slipping on wet rock. His arms reached through the gap, so thin they almost looked broken, and clawed at the air. Fingernails cracked, skin tore, but he didn't stop. He wanted me, not as a brother, as food. And somehow, somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood. He had been alone for too long, in the dark, with only the sound of dripping water and his own starving thoughts. Something had broken in him. Something had turned. I wasn't rescuing him. I had woken him. I turned and limped toward the rope, barely able to drag myself across the stone. Behind me, I could hear his guttural breathing, his bones scraping against the tunnel wall as he squeezed after me like a desperate animal. But the crack narrowed again, and he couldn't follow. I could hear the frustration in the way his body slammed into the wall, once, twice, 3 times, each time accompanied by a snarling sound that didn't sound human. I hooked my harness onto the rope with shaking hands and began the climb. It was agony. Every tug of the rope sent fire through my injured leg. I was sobbing, gasping, slipping, scraping skin off my arms and knees on the sharp rock. My flashlight flickered once, then again, and I thought it would die entirely. But it held. At the mouth of the shaft, I collapsed on the ledge, too weak to cry, too tired to scream. But then, splash. My blood turned to ice. I looked down the rope, heart seizing in my chest. Something was pulling it, not climbing, yanking, fast, like a fishhook in reverse. "No, no, no, no," I whispered, desperately unhooking my harness. The moment the carabiner came free, the rope snapped downward, disappearing into the darkness with a sound like a whip. He had followed the rope. He had almost reached me. I lay there, panting, my limbs trembling. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then I saw it. His hand, gripping the lip of the shaft. How? How had he squeezed through? The fingers curled over the edge. They looked even more skeletal than before. The nails were cracked and missing. Bits of raw flesh hung from the knuckles, but they held, shaking with effort. I had no choice. I reached into my bag, pulled out a flare, and struck it. The sudden light bathed the chamber in red, and he screamed. It was an unholy sound, animal, child, echoing off every wall. He let go of the rock and vanished backward, disappearing down the shaft like a spider retreating from fire. I didn't wait. I crawled limped, dragged myself up the tunnel, through the mud, back toward the faint glow of sunlight bleeding through the cave mouth far above. I reached it just as my body gave out. I collapsed on the forest floor, the red flare still burning in my hand like a cursed torch. I had made it out, but he was still down there, and he knew I was alive. The moment the sun hit my face, I broke. I lay on the forest floor gasping like a newborn, blinking against the daylight as if I hadn't seen it in years. The cold from the cave clung to my skin like a second layer of flesh, and my leg, God, my leg, was pulsing with heat and pain. The makeshift bandage was soaked red, the blood having turned a strange blackish hue in the center. It wasn't just an injury anymore. It was infection, or worse. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands. Mud caked beneath my fingernails. The screen was cracked, smeared with blood, but it lit up. No bars, no signal. I was deep in the woods, alone, bleeding out. I knew I had minutes, maybe an hour if I stayed conscious, but I wasn't leaving my brother down there. Not again. With what little strength I had left, I opened the voice recorder and whispered into it. My name is Chris Dwyer. I went into the cave behind my parents' house, and I found my brother, Kieran. He's alive. Changed, but alive. I'm injured, bitten. He bit me. I'm leaving this here in case I don't make it. I dropped the phone next to a jagged root and scrawled "help" into the dirt beside it, just in case someone passed by. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring. Chris? Her voice cracked with confusion and fear. Mom, I breathed. I found him. Silence. I found Kieran. He's in the cave. I'm at the mouth. I need help. Please. Call an ambulance. I heard her sob, the phone clattering to the floor, my dad shouting in the background, and then static as the call cut off. I don't remember losing consciousness, just waking to the sound of sirens and boots on gravel, voices echoing through the woods, bright orange jackets moving through the trees. I tried to wave, but my body wouldn't obey. Someone knelt beside me and slapped my cheek gently. Hey, stay with me, we got you. A mask went over my mouth, the smell of antiseptic. A needle in my arm. My vision turned to white. I woke up in a hospital bed with beeping machines and a dull, constant ache in my leg. I was alive. Barely. But I had survived. What followed was chaos. Doctors examining the bite told me it was unmistakably human. Small. Like that of a child. The infection had already begun to spread, but they pumped me with antibiotics and painkillers. I kept slipping in and out of consciousness, muttering about the cave, about Kieran, about white eyes in the dark. When I stabilized enough to speak clearly, I gave my full report to the authorities. They didn't believe me. Not at first. They thought the injury was caused by an animal, maybe a raccoon, a desperate hallucination in a near-death state. But when I told them the tunnel was accessible now, when I showed them the exact location on the cave map, the uncharted chamber, I saw doubt flicker behind their eyes. Then my parents came. My dad burst into the room, grief and hope tangled into one twisted expression. You saw him? He asked, gripping the rail of my bed, hard enough to turn his knuckles white. You saw our boy? I nodded. He's alive, but he's not the same. My mother stood at the foot of the bed, quiet, pale. She didn't say anything, just stared at me, her mouth slightly open as if frozen mid-prayer. That night, I had nightmares. Not of Kieran calling my name like before, but of him remembering me, of his blind white eyes watching me, of his teeth, of him whispering my name in the dark, over and over again, until it sounded like a curse. The next day, a search and rescue team was assembled. Professional cavers, small, agile, equipped with drones and body cams. I begged to go with them. They refused, so I gave them everything I had. Maps, notes, warnings. The location of the narrow crack, the chamber, the flare that made him scream, and the wrapper, the one he took, the one I didn't bring. It was proof. They went down that afternoon. The cave was more dangerous than expected. The narrow tunnel had partially collapsed from moisture and shifting stone. Only one of the team members, a petite woman named Sarah, could fit into the shaft with a micro drone and flashlight clipped to her shoulder. She made it to the chamber, and she found it exactly as I described. The pool, the ledge, the blood, and the wrapper was gone. When she reached the crack in the stone, she placed another granola bar near it and waited. Nothing. No movement, no breathing, no sound. But when she returned an hour later, the bar was missing. They set a thermal camera near the crack. Nothing showed. It was too deep, too winding, like trying to map a spider's web with a flashlight. The official report classified Kieran as presumed alive, inaccessible. The tunnel was too narrow for anyone else, too dangerous. They posted a team at the site for 72 hours, hoping to lure him out. He never came, but the food kept disappearing. Now, we leave supplies at the mouth of the cave, wrapped, dried, sometimes warm, and in the morning they're gone. He takes them quietly, never seen, never heard. I dream of him every night. Sometimes I see him outside my window. Sometimes I hear scratching on the walls. They say trauma plays tricks on the mind, but I know better. I saw him, and I know what he's become. 3 months have passed since I crawled out of that cave, bleeding and broken, carrying the impossible truth in my veins. My leg has healed, mostly. The tissue damage was extensive. The doctors were baffled by how deep the bite went, how much flesh was missing. They used phrases like necrotic spread and trauma-induced mutation. One even asked if it could have been a bear cub. I didn't correct them. I just kept quiet. The scar is jagged, a half moon of thickened flesh that pulses on cold nights, like it remembers what those teeth felt like. Sometimes I dream that it reopens on its own, and something crawls out. I see Kieran in my sleep every night now, not the boy I grew up with, the thing he's become. I see his pale face watching from corners. I hear the click of his fingernails against tile. I wake up drenched in sweat, convinced that he's just outside the bedroom door, waiting, too patient for a child. My parents have changed, again. My mother speaks to no one but herself. She sits by the window for hours at a time, staring at the tree line beyond our backyard. She writes notes on yellow paper and folds them into little triangles, like she used to do with Kieran when he learned how to read. My father spends his days digging, not metaphorically, literally. He cleared a patch of earth in the yard near the cave trail and started moving dirt, rock, anything he can lift. He says he's building a safe entrance, a new tunnel, something he can crawl through. His palms are cracked and bleeding. He doesn't sleep, doesn't eat unless I remind him. He believes we'll bring Kieran home, but I'm not sure that version of Kieran exists anymore. Search teams still visit the cave, quietly, without media coverage. They don't want attention. The local government has sealed off the trail, citing unstable rock formations. But I know better. They're scared. They're watching. Because of what I told them. Because of what Sarah, the only cave team member small enough to reach the chamber, saw during her last visit. She had returned to the ledge alone, leaving a motion-activated camera pointed at the crack in the wall. She set a protein bar just outside it and activated the lens. Then she climbed back. When the team reviewed the footage later, what they saw was this. At 3:12 a.m., the bar vanished. Not picked up, not unwrapped, gone. And a few seconds later, the camera began to shake, just slightly, like something had brushed it. And then, a face, just for one frame, not even a second. Eyes, pale, blinking, unblinking, mouth open just a little, as if tasting the air. The frame distorted after that, glitchy, like the signal itself recoiled. They showed me the still. I said nothing. I just nodded. So since then, no one's been back down. They say the passages are too unstable. But I know the real reason. They're afraid of waking him again. The local police quietly informed my family that any continued contact or intervention with the cave would be considered a liability. There's no evidence of a living human child, they told us. There's no way to verify your claims. But they never once denied the bite. They know something is down there. They just don't want to be the ones to face it. So, now we wait. We leave food, blankets, batteries, toys, sometimes. Kieran doesn't take everything. Sometimes he leaves things behind. Once it was a handful of fish bones, arranged in the shape of a star. Another time, a drawing, scratched into stone with something sharp. It looked like our old house, windows, a swing set, and 2 stick figures. One large, one small, holding hands. That night, I sobbed until my throat burned. I think, somewhere deep inside, he still remembers. Not just me, us, our family. The warm summer mornings, Saturday cartoons, the night I taught him how to whistle, the time he tried to eat cereal with a fork just to make me laugh. That's what breaks me the most. Because what if he does remember? What if he knows what he's become? What if the hunger inside him is stronger than his memory? He was 5 when he vanished. He'll be 8 soon. I don't know how long he can survive down there. I don't know if he wants to. Sometimes I ask myself, what if he isn't trapped? What if he stayed? What if the cave didn't just change him? What if it claimed him? I don't believe in monsters, but I believe in the dark. And I believe in what it can do to someone who spends too long inside it. So now, every night, I return to the cave. I sit at the mouth, just where the grass meets the stone, and I whisper stories into the blackness. Stories about home, about sunshine, about who we used to be. I don't know if he listens, but sometimes, just sometimes, I hear breathing on the wind. And once, I heard a whisper back, faint, croaking, "Chris." It was enough. For now, I'll wait, as long as it takes, because monsters don't just appear. Sometimes we leave them behind, and they remember us.